Okay, welcome back to our study of Mishnayot, Masechet Berachot. We're up to Perek Dalid, Mishnah Vav. Last two chapters of this Mishnah are in the docket today, of this Perek are in the docket today. Mishnah Vav is essentially a piggyback or an extension of Mishnah He, which discussed directional prayer in extenuating circumstances. The Mishnah talks about, as we sort of left off yesterday, talking about boats, wagons, other types of vehicles which move, and how a person goes about maintaining his posture and his directionality during travel in these types of vehicles. If a person was sitting in a boat or a wagon or an asda, Baratirura says, is etzim harbek shurim umudakim yahan, many logs or pieces of wood that are tied together. Essentially, it's a raft. The Mishnah does not even give him room to attempt to try and stand and face his direction of prayer, because they know that this is not possible. If a person would try to stand in these types of vehicles, they would constantly be worried about the potential for falling. These types of vehicles shake consistently. There's a safety issue. And so a person will end up focusing more on that than on the prayer. Therefore, it's appropriate to remain seated and for a person to have kavanah that his directionality should be towards Bet Kodesh HaKodashim. And this is how the halakha should be observed when a person is on planes, when a person is on a train or a bus, traveling and needs to pray, that they should remain seated. If they have the opportunity to turn their head in the direction of east or whatever direction towards Kodesh HaKodashim, then they should do so, but otherwise they should just be mechaver et libo. They should not attempt to try and stand up, because that will actually ruin their kavanah, and yatzas charal behefsedo, whatever reward they get for standing would get lost in the fact that they would not have proper kavanah. In general, it's worth noting, why is it that the amidah has to be said, ba'amidah has to be said standing? So Shulchan Aruch in Siman Sadihet brings the idea that since tefillah is keneged korbanot, that tefillah serves as a filler or a complement to korbanot, so just as korbanot, the kohanim had to be standing when they performed the service, so too in tefillah, the prayer has to be standing during service. So standing is whenever possible. When not possible, then a person should sit in order to have maximum kavanah. Let's move to the final Mishnah of Perek Dalid. The final Mishnah talks about tefillat Mussaf, and specifically praying tefillat Mussaf with or without a tzibur, with or without a minyan. The Mishnah brings a three-way mahloket. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, "En tefillat musafim ela behaver ir." The prayer of Mussaf may not be said ela except behaver ir. The phrase haver ir, in a moment we'll read the Rambam's commentary to explain where it comes from, but for the sake of just understanding the mahloket, it means a minyan. So according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, tefillat Mussaf may not be prayed but with a minyan. As Baratirura says, Bahavurat Ir. He explains Haver Ir from the word Habura. Habura means a group. Only when you pray together with the inhabitants of the city. Klomar betzibur velo biyahid. According to the Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Mussaf is a prayer you can only say with a minyan. The Hachamim Omrim, the sages disagreed and said, Behaver Ir v'shelo behaver Ir. A person can pray tefillat Mussaf both with or without a minyan. Having a minyan is not something that would prevent a person, it's not ma'akev, a person's ability to pray tefillat Mussaf. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishemo, a third opinion is Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So we have two different versions of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's opinion. The second version of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's opinion, which is brought by Rabbi Yehuda, states, Kol makom sheyesh haver ir, any city which has a minyan, the individual is exempt from praying tefillat Mussaf, unless, of course, he is together with that minyan. If he's solo, then he's exempt from praying. Now, this sounds a lot like the first opinion, right? He's saying any place which has a minyan, so the yahid is exempt, which kind of sounds like the yahid does not pray on his own. So what's the difference? What?
Someone without a minyan in a city.
Right.
Then he could pray.
Right, so then he's not, and is obligated. So Baratirura brings this idea, right? Baratirura records, I'll read to you his language on Rabbi Yehuda's comments. He says, Ika ben Tanakama Rabbi Yehuda, the difference between Tanakama's version of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Yehuda's version of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is Yahid Hadar Ba'ir She'en Shem Asara, is an individual who is living in a city which does not have a minyan in the city. That would be the nafkamina, that would be the difference. Letanakama, according to Tanakama, who says you cannot pray Tefillat Mussaf but with a minyan, in such a situation, lo tiknuha, there's no Mussaf. Just because the city doesn't have a minyan doesn't mean that the individual can start praying. The individual cannot pray Mussaf unless there's a minyan. However, according to the Yehuda, the exemption of an individual is only if a minyan exists in the city. If a minyan does not exist in the city, then an individual is still obligated to pray Tefillat Mussaf on his own, right? So that's what he says. Let Rabbi Yehuda en yahid patur. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the individual is not exempt ela kishehu bimkom asara, unless he's in a place where there's 10. Sheshaliach tzibur potro, and the logic is that if there is a minyan, then the hazan of the city will exempt him, right? But if there is no minyan, then there's no hazan to pray on his behalf, then he has to pray on his own. So according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, it doesn't matter whether there is or isn't a minyan, at least according to Tanakama, it's dependent on the individual with or without a minyan. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it matters if there is a minyan in the city or not. Now all of this is moot anyway, halacha lema'aseh, because Bartenura tells us halacha kahachamim, that the halacha follows the sages, that we pray Tefillat Mussaf both with or without a minyan. It doesn't matter if there is or is not a minyan in the city. Mussaf is like every other prayer, shaharit, minha, and arbit. It could be prayed without a minyan. Let's just double back for a moment and ask ourselves the question, why was there even a hava amina? Why is there even a debate that Tefillat Mussaf should require a minyan more than any of the other prayers? Why do we even ask this question? We don't need a minyan for arbit. We don't need a minyan for shaharit or minha. Why is there a thought, according to many, that you have to have a minyan for Tefillat Mussaf? So the Tosafot Yom Tov over here writes, the thought process is that since Tefillat Mussaf contains no requests, Tefillat Mussaf of Shabbat and Yamim Tovim has no requests in it. It just describes the Korban, has 3 Berachot before and after of praise and thanks. There's en batahanunim, there's no supplications, kemo b'yirchet, the way there is in a normal Amidah of 18 or today 19 Berachot. וגם אין אנו מתפללים אותה כנגד תחנונים של חול, כמו שמתפללים תפילת יוצר או תפילת מנחה, and we don't pray this prayer parallel to any other prayer that we would normally pray at tahanunim. So meaning even shaharit and minha of Shabbat doesn't have any requests, but it's based upon the shaharit and minha that we pray during the week, which has requests. So Tefillat Mussaf never has a request in it, whether it's Rosh Chodesh, whether it's Shabbat, Yamim Tovim, it doesn't have any tahanunim. Shaharit and minha of Shabbat will not, but of the weekday it will. So this thought process led many of the Tanaim here to believe that since it doesn't have any tahanunim, there's no need to force the individual to pray it because he's not requesting anything anyway. It's enough that the tzibur, that the kahal prays this prayer of praise and covers the individual who's part of the town in their prayers. It's a more toned down version of prayer because there's no request. That was Tosfot Yom Tov. So we said there's no request on Shabbat Shahrit, but at least Shabbat Shahrit is parallel to Shahrit during the week, and Shahrit during the week does have requests. So we're not going to make a chiluk between Shabbat during the week and Shabbat on Shaharit during the week and Shaharit on Shabbat, one with a minyan, one not with a minyan. We're just going to say Shaharit always has. But since Mussaf never has tahanunim, therefore there was a thought process that it should only be said together with a minyan. Another logic one could argue is that since Tefillat Mussaf is kulo keneged ha-korban, is totally based upon the korban, right? There's no, there's no rahamim. This is kind of what we mean. There's no requesting, right? It's all based on the korban. So the korban is a tzibur. So therefore, a person should always pray Mussaf tzibur. But since shaharit, minha, and arbit have elements of personal rahamim, then a person should say, "Oh, I could pray it as an individual." Hence the difference between yahid and minyan. I just wanted to take a moment to read Harambam's commentary on this Mishnah about the word haver ir. So we said, according to Bartenura, haver ir comes from the word habura. Rambam gives a different understanding. He says, haver shem talmid hacham. The word haver is a name for somebody who is a Torah scholar. Hence, when the rabbis differentiated between people who were observant of the laws of Tirumot and Ma'asrot, as we'll see later on when we get to Pe'ah, Demai, and other agricultural Masechtot, they called the people who were observant, they called them Haverim, because they were Talmidei Hachamim. As opposed to people who were not on that level, they called them Ameh Haaretz. Not because they weren't observant at all or ignorant, just that didn't hold to those laws. So a Haver is a Talmid Hacham. Uperush Haver Ir, when we say Haver Ir, we mean Hacham HaMedina. We're talking about the scholar, the Torah scholar of the province. Vehu Kinui, this is a nickname, Be'ad Tefilat HaKahal, for prayer in a congregation. Why? Because what we're saying is people should gather together with the Torah scholar to pray in a minyan. So fascinating, the idea of Haver Ir connotes the idea of coming together as a kahal, specifically revolving around a Torah scholar, a Talmid Hacham, to pray in unison. And hence it's called Haver Ir. I found that to be a fascinating etymology of that phrase, and tells us a little bit about prayer being together, not only with people, but also with righteous people, and having a hacham at the center of that minyan. As we know in halachas like hachamim, one prays tefilat Mussaf both with and without a minyan. That concludes Perek Dalet. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.